The doctor saw the millionaire's wife ultrasound and warned him to divorce. His final decision shocked everyone. Hi, my loyal, great, loving, caring and respectful, beautiful family. Welcome to your own family story channel. God bless you, everyone. Today's story is full of twists, emotions and shocking moments. When the doctor saw the millionaire's wife's ultrasound, he gave a warning that no one expected, but the husband's final decision left everyone in shock. This is my second channel, Mr. Peter Family. I have a humble request, my beautiful family. Please watch the full story, like, and leave your precious comments. When you stop halfway, it truly hurts me, but I promise you, I will never disappoint you. I am not like other creators who waste your time with clickbait. Every story here is made with love, passion, and respect for you, my family. Let's start the most powerful story together. The phone call that would change everything came at exactly 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, while Alfonso Davies stood in his billion-dollar office, wondering if God had forgotten his name. For 5 years, the question had haunted him. Why couldn't the richest man in America buy the one thing that mattered most? At 34, Alfonso commanded an $8 billion tech empire, owned private islands, and had presidents on speed dial. But he couldn't give his beloved wife Desiree the child they both desperately craved. "Mr. Davies, I have Mrs. Scott's results." Dr. Martinez's voice crackled through the speakerphone, pulling Alfonso from his tormented thoughts. His hands trembled as he gripped the mahogany desk that had witnessed 1,000 business victories. But this wasn't about money or power. This was about the woman sleeping peacefully in their penthouse across the city, the woman who'd held him while he cried after each failed treatment, the woman whose heart broke a little more each month when hope turned to ashes. The next words would transform a billionaire into a man who believed in miracles. "Congratulations, Mr. Davies. Your wife is pregnant." The phone slipped from Alfonso's fingers as if his bones had turned to water. Through his floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan stretched endlessly below, but all he could see was Desiree's face, the face that had haunted his dreams since the moment he'd seen her at that charity gala 6 years ago. 20 minutes later, he burst through their penthouse doors, like a man possessed by joy itself. Desiree stood by their grand piano, her silhouette backlit by golden afternoon sun, still wearing the cream silk dress that made her look like a goddess walking among mortals. "Alfonso," she whispered, reading something extraordinary in his expression. He crossed their living room in 3 desperate strides, gathering her into his arms like she was the answer to every prayer he'd ever whispered into the darkness. "We did it, baby," he breathed against her hair. "After 5 years of heartbreak, we finally did it." What happened next would be seared into their souls forever, the moment their love transcended from earthly to divine. Desiree's legs gave out, and Alfonso caught her, both of them sinking to the marble floor in a tangle of desperate kisses and joyful tears. She tasted like hope and promises, like every dream he'd ever dared to dream. "Are you sure?" she gasped between kisses. "Are you absolutely, completely sure?" "Dr. Martinez confirmed it," Alfonso whispered, framing her face with hands that shook with wonder. "You're carrying our miracle, Desiree, our perfect, impossible miracle." He swept her into his arms, carrying her toward their bedroom like she was made of spun starlight. Their lovemaking that afternoon wasn't just passion. It was celebration, worship, the physical expression of a love so deep it seemed to bend reality around them. "I'm going to give you everything," Alfonso murmured against her neck as they moved together in perfect harmony. "The whole world, baby, everything." That night, as Manhattan glittered below them, Alfonso made decisions that would shock the business world. While Desiree slept peacefully in his arms, her hand resting unconsciously over her still flat stomach, Alfonso's mind raced with plans. By morning he'd cancelled the Singapore merger, a deal worth $500 million. By noon, he'd cleared his schedule for the next 9 months. "Sir, the board is demanding an explanation," his assistant stammered over the phone. "Tell them I'm about to become a father," Alfonso replied, never taking his eyes off his sleeping wife. "Tell them that's the only job that matters now." Within days, he'd surprised Desiree with a private jet to Paris, where they made love under the Eiffel Tower while she wore a $2 million diamond necklace he'd bought just to see her eyes light up. Within weeks, he'd purchased an entire Caribbean island and named it Paradise Cove, population 3. The romance that followed was the stuff of legends, but neither could have imagined the darkness gathering around their perfect love. In a shadowy corner of Manhattan, Vincent Davies, Alfonso's bitter half-brother, studied financial reports with hungry, hateful eyes. Beside him, his wife Elena traced her finger over legal documents with calculating precision. 5 years they've been trying, Marcus snarled. 5 years, and now suddenly she's pregnant right after he makes her his sole heir. The timing is convenient, don't you think? Elena's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Very convenient, but accidents happen, Marcus, especially when the right doctor asks the right questions. They began making phone calls that night, reaching out to professionals who understood that money could buy more than luxury. It could buy destruction. But in their penthouse paradise, wrapped in silk sheets and each other's arms, Alfonso and Desiree planned nurseries and whispered baby names, believing their love was unshakable. They had no idea that war had been declared on their happiness, and the first battle would be fought in a doctor's office with weapons made of lies. Chapter 2. Hearts Intertwined and Royal Treatment. 3 weeks after the miracle was confirmed, Desiree Scott Davies woke up to find her husband had bought an entire island while she slept, and that was just Tuesday. "Alfonso, you've completely lost your mind," she laughed, staring at the deed to Paradise Cove spread across their breakfast table. At 8 weeks pregnant, the morning sickness had begun, but even nausea couldn't dim the radiant glow that made her husband fall deeper in love every time he looked at her. Alfonso emerged from their kitchen carrying ginger tea and the exact toast she'd been craving. He'd memorized every one of her needs, every wish, every whisper of discomfort. The most powerful man in America had become her devoted servant, and he wore the role like a crown. "Not lost my mind, baby," he murmured, settling beside her and pulling her into his arms with infinite gentleness. "Found my purpose. Welcome to our private paradise, population, the 3 of us." By noon they were soaring over crystal-clear Caribbean waters in his private jet, heading toward the most romantic chapter of their love story. Paradise Cove was a masterpiece of tropical beauty, white sand beaches, swaying palms, and a villa that belonged in fairy tales. But Alfonso had transformed it into something beyond magical. Rose petals created glittering paths from room to room. Candles flickered in every window like captured stars. A world-renowned chef waited to prepare anything her changing body craved. "You did all this for me?" Desiree breathed, wandering through rooms that looked like heaven had been decorated by angels. "I'd rearrange the constellations if it would make you smile," Alfonso replied, his arms sliding around her waist with reverent care. "I'd buy every star in the sky and spell out your name across the universe." Their first night on the island, they made love on silk sheets under a canopy of actual stars, the ocean whispering symphonies just beyond their windows. Alfonso worshipped her changing body with a devotion that brought tears to her eyes, his hands and lips mapping every curve like he was memorizing sacred scripture. The next morning brought a phone call that would prove Alfonso's love knew absolutely no limits. His phone had been buzzing incessantly since dawn. The Singapore merger was crumbling, investors were panicking, the board was in chaos. $500 million hung in the balance, along with deals that had taken 2 years to negotiate. Desiree found him on their private beach, staring at the phone like it was a serpent ready to strike. "Go," she said softly, her hand resting protectively over her growing belly. "I understand, baby. Business is—" Alfonso's response shocked her into silence. He raised the phone to his ear with deadly calm. "Henderson, cancel everything. Tell Singapore we're pulling out of the merger." "But sir, that's $500 million. "I don't care if it's half my empire," Alfonso said, his eyes never leaving Desiree's stunned face. "My wife is pregnant with our first child. Nothing else exists." He ended the call and hurled the phone into the turquoise ocean, where it disappeared without a trace. For the next week, they lived like the only 2 people on Earth, and every moment was pure magic. Every morning, Alfonso brought breakfast in bed, feeding her strawberries while telling her stories about their future son. He was convinced it would be a boy. "Little Alfonso," he'd say, making her laugh and shake her head. "Absolutely not," she'd tease. "One massive ego in this family is quite enough." Every afternoon, they walked endless beaches hand in hand, building sandcastles and planning their child's life. Every evening, they danced on their terrace to music that seemed to drift from the very air itself. Desiree's growing belly pressed against his heart as they swayed under tropical stars. But it was their last night that would haunt them both through the darkness ahead. As they lay tangled in silk sheets, moonlight painting their skin silver, Alfonso made a decision that would bind their fates forever. "I'm changing my will tomorrow," he said quietly, his hand resting protectively on her stomach where their miracle grew. Desiree stiffened against him. "Alfonso, we don't need to talk about—" "Yes, we do." He turned to face her, his eyes serious in the moonlight. "If anything ever happens to me, I want you and our children to have everything. Not Marcus, not my family. You. Only you." "Why are you talking like this?" she whispered, suddenly frightened by something she couldn't name. "Because I love you more than life itself," he replied, pressing his lips to her forehead with desperate tenderness. "And because sometimes the people who should protect you are the ones who hurt you most." The next morning, lawyers flew to their paradise, and by sunset, Desiree Scott had become the sole heir to the Davies empire. But it was the private ceremony afterwards that truly revealed Alfonso's heart. He'd arranged for their original wedding officiant to fly in, and on the beach where they'd fallen deeper in love, they renewed their vows. "6 years ago, I promised to love you forever," Alfonso said, sliding a new ring onto her finger, a band encrusted with diamonds that spelled forever in flowing script. "Today, I promise that our son will grow up knowing what true love looks like." Desiree's vows were simpler, but no less powerful. "You've shown me what it means to be cherished and adored. I promise our child will know what real devotion looks like, because he'll see it every day in how you love me." That night, their lovemaking reached heights that seemed to touch the divine itself. They moved together with desperate passion, as if they could sense that perfection was fragile and time was running out. As their jet climbed toward New York the next morning, neither could have imagined that their enemies had already chosen their weapon. In a sterile medical office in Manhattan, Dr. Richard Richardson signed contracts that would make him rich and damn his soul. Marcus Davies slid the briefcase across the mahogany desk, his eyes glittering with anticipated victory. $1 million, Marcus said quietly. "Just plant the right seeds of doubt." Elena leaned forward, her smile sharp as broken glass. "All you have to do is twist the truth. Take something real and make it look like betrayal." Dr. Richardson's hands trembled as he opened the case, revealing neat stacks of $100 bills. "What if he doesn't believe me?" "Oh, he'll believe you," Marcus replied with absolute certainty. Because you're not going to lie to him. You're going to tell him the truth, just not all of it. But back in their penthouse, wrapped in post-paradise bliss, Alfonso and Desiree were choosing paint colors and debating baby names, believing their love was unbreakable. The trap had been set, the weapon had been chosen, and the war for their family was about to begin. Chapter 3: Love's Greatest Promise, and the Trap is Set. The morning Desiree woke up to find her name carved in gold letters on the side of a children's hospital was the morning she realized her husband's love was truly infinite. "Alfonso Davies, what have you done now?" she whispered, staring at the morning news footage playing on their bedroom television. The reporter's voice filled their penthouse sanctuary. In a surprise announcement, tech billionaire Alfonso Davies has donated $10 million to completely renovate Brooklyn Children's Hospital, renaming it the Desiree Scott Davies Center for Pediatric Excellence. Alfonso emerged from their marble bathroom, already dressed in his custom Italian suit, grinning like a man who'd just conquered the world and decided to give it away as a present. "Happy 4-month anniversary of our miracle," he said, crossing to where his wife sat propped against silk pillows, her belly now beautifully rounded beneath her nightgown, the sight that had become his favorite view in all the world. "You named a hospital after me," Desiree said, still staring at the television in complete disbelief. "I'd name every building in Manhattan after you if they'd let me." He settled beside her, pulling her into his arms with the reverent care he'd shown since the day they'd learned about their miracle. "Every child who gets healed in that hospital will know they owe their chance to the most incredible woman who ever lived." That afternoon, they stood together in the hospital's newly renovated lobby, watching children play in bright, cheerful spaces that bore her name, and Desiree finally understood the true power of being loved by Alfonso Davies. "Mrs. Davies," a small voice piped up. A little girl, maybe 6 years old, tugged on Desiree's designer dress with paint-stained fingers. "Are you the angel lady who made our hospital pretty?" Desiree knelt down carefully, her hand instinctively protective over her growing child. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Emma. My mama says you're the reason I get to have my surgery in a princess room instead of a scary one." Alfonso watched his wife's eyes fill with tears as she hugged the little girl, and in that moment he knew with absolute certainty that she'd been born to be a mother. His throat tightened with emotion as Emma's mother approached, gratitude shining in her tear-filled eyes. "Thank you," the woman whispered. "You have no idea what this means to families like ours." But while Alfonso and Desiree basked in the glow of their charitable triumph across the city, deadly pieces were falling into place. Dr. Richard Richardson sat in his office, reviewing medical files with the focused intensity of a man about to commit the perfect crime. The genetic report spread across his desk was real, completely, authentically real. It showed exactly what Vincent Davies had promised it would show. Alfonso Davies carried a rare but harmless genetic variant, a chromosomal marker that appeared in less than 1% of the population. Completely benign, medically insignificant, but unusual enough to raise questions in the right circumstances. "Perfect," Richardson murmured, practicing his speech in the empty room. "Mr. Davies, I've identified some unusual genetic markers." The beauty of the plan was its simplicity. He wouldn't lie, not exactly. He would simply present the truth in a way that invited the worst possible interpretation. His phone buzzed, a text from Elena Davies. "Tomorrow at 3 p.m. Remember, you're not lying. You're just asking the right questions." That same evening, on their private yacht anchored in the Hudson River, Alfonso and Desiree were creating the memories that would sustain them through the hell ahead. The yacht was a floating palace, 150 feet of pure luxury that Alfonso had bought specifically for nights like this. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing rainbows across the polished deck, where he'd arranged dinner under a canopy of stars. "You're spoiling me again," Desiree laughed, settling into the chair he'd pulled out for her with courtly grace. The Manhattan skyline glittered before them like scattered diamonds, but Alfonso only had eyes for his wife. "Impossible," he murmured, pouring sparkling cider for her and champagne for himself. "You can't spoil perfection." After dinner, they moved to the upper deck where a bed had been prepared under the open sky. As the yacht swayed gently on the dark water, Alfonso made love to his wife with a passion that seemed to set the very stars on fire. "I can never get enough of you," he whispered against her throat as she moved above him, her pregnant silhouette painted in moonlight. "If we had 1,000 lifetimes, it still wouldn't be enough." Later, as they lay entwined in post-passionate bliss, Alfonso made a promise that would later seem prophetic. "Our son is going to inherit more than money," he said, his voice soft but certain as his hand traced patterns on her bare shoulder. "He's going to inherit a legacy of love. He'll know what it looks like when a man truly worships his wife." Desiree pressed her lips to his chest, tasting salt and devotion. "How are you so certain it's a boy?" "Because he's going to be just like his daddy, completely, hopelessly, eternally in love with his mama." Alfonso's voice grew serious, almost urgent. "Promise me something, Des. Anything. Promise me that no matter what happens, no matter who tries to come between us or what lies they tell, you'll remember this moment. Remember how much I love you. Remember that you are my heart, my soul, my everything." A chill ran through Desiree despite the warm night air, as if dark wings had passed over their perfect world. "Why are you talking like that?" Alfonso pulled her closer, suddenly desperate to shield her from something he couldn't name but could somehow sense approaching. "Just promise me, baby. Promise you'll remember." "I promise," she whispered against his skin, not knowing she was making a vow that would be tested beyond all endurance. "I'll always remember how much we love each other." The next morning brought news that should have filled them with joy but somehow felt ominous. "Your 20-week ultrasound is scheduled for this Thursday," Dr. Martinez's nurse informed them cheerfully over the phone. "Dr. Richardson will be handling the appointment. He's our new genetics specialist." Alfonso frowned at the unfamiliar name. "What happened to Dr. Martinez?" "Family emergency, but don't worry. Dr. Richardson is highly recommended. He specializes in genetic analysis." After hanging up, Alfonso found Desiree in their nursery, her hands resting on the crib they'd chosen together. The room was a masterpiece of love and luxury. Hand-painted murals depicting fairy tale castles, the finest furniture money could buy, and in the center, a musical mobile of dancing angels that played their wedding song. "Ready to find out if you're having little Alfonso?" he teased, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "For the last time, we are not naming our son after you," she laughed. But something in her voice wasn't quite right, as if she, too, could sense storm clouds gathering. Thursday arrived with all the ceremony of Judgment Day, though neither Alfonso nor Desiree could have known it. As they walked into the medical center, hands intertwined, hearts full of anticipation, they were walking into a trap that had been 6 months in the making. Dr. Richardson watched them approach through his office window, the real genetic report, the weapon that would destroy their perfect love hidden in his desk drawer. In just 1 hour, he would take something completely innocent and twist it into the most devastating betrayal imaginable. But for now, Alfonso and Desiree sat in the waiting room, her head resting on his shoulder, both of them dreaming of seeing their miracle baby and learning whether their child would be a son or daughter. They had no idea they were about to enter the first circle of hell, and that the man who would guide them there was wearing a doctor's coat and a smile that hid the heart of a demon. Chapter 4. The Sinister Web and Devastating Betrayal. The ultrasound that would destroy a perfect marriage began with the sound of pure joy, their baby's heartbeat filling the room like a symphony from heaven. Dr. Richardson moved the ultrasound wand across Desiree's 20-week belly with practiced precision, and there he was, their son, perfect in every detail, sucking his tiny thumb on the grainy black-and-white screen. Alfonso squeezed his wife's hand, tears of wonder streaming down his face. "Look at him," Desiree breathed, her voice thick with emotion as she stared at their miracle. "He's absolutely perfect." 10 fingers, 10 toes, and strong as his mama, Alfonso murmured, pressing his lips to her forehead with infinite tenderness. "Our beautiful boy." But something was changing in Dr. Richardson's expression. His brow furrowed as he stared at the screen, taking measurement after measurement, his movements growing increasingly deliberate and concerned. "Is everything all right?" Desiree asked, her mother's instincts already sensing the shift in the room's energy. That's when Dr. Richardson began weaving the web that would trap their hearts in hell. "The baby appears completely healthy," he said, but his tone carried an undertone that made Alfonso's protective instincts flare to life. "However, I am seeing some unusual genetic markers that require discussion." Alfonso's hand tightened on Desiree's as ice began forming in his veins. "What kind of genetic markers?" Dr. Richardson printed several ultrasound images, his hands moving with the calculated precision of a man executing a carefully rehearsed plan. "I need to run some additional analysis. Sometimes these variations can tell us important things about paternal lineage." As Desiree cleaned the gel from her belly in the adjoining bathroom, Dr. Richardson made his move, the move that Marcus Davies had paid him $1 million to make. "Mr. Davies, could I speak with you privately? There are some concerns I need to discuss with you immediately." The moment Alfonso followed him into the private office, he walked into the most sophisticated trap ever laid for a human heart. Dr. Richardson closed the door and turned to face Alfonso with the expression of a man carrying devastating news. On his desk lay real medical reports, completely authentic genetic analysis that would become the weapon of mass destruction. "Mr. Davies, what I'm about to share with you is extremely sensitive," Dr. Richardson began, his voice heavy with manufactured gravity. "I've identified some very rare genetic markers in your child's DNA, markers that appear in less than 1% of the population." Alfonso's world began to tilt dangerously. "What does that mean?" "It means your son carries a genetic variant that is highly unusual." Dr. Richardson opened the file, revealing the real genetic report that showed Alfonso's rare chromosomal marker. "The question we must ask is, where did this variant come from?" Then Dr. Richardson delivered the poisoned dagger that would pierce Alfonso's soul. "Mr. Davies, I've been practicing genetic medicine for 20 years and I've learned to recognize patterns. This particular genetic variant, it's not commonly found in your family's ethnic background." The room began spinning around Alfonso as he gripped the edge of the desk. "What are you trying to tell me?" Dr. Richardson leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried the weight of absolute authority. "Sir, I strongly advise you to divorce your wife. For your safety and your family's future, do it before it's too late." The words hit Alfonso like lightning, and he staggered backward as if he'd been physically struck. "That's impossible," he whispered, but already his mind was racing, searching desperately for cracks in his perfect life that he'd been too blind to see. "I know this is devastating to hear," Dr. Richardson continued with practiced sympathy, "but the genetic evidence suggests that paternity may be questionable. And in my experience, when there are questions about paternity, there are usually questions about other forms of deception as well." As Alfonso stared at the authentic genetic report that was being twisted into a weapon, his phone buzzed with a text that would push him over the edge. The message was from Vincent. "Brother, I hate to be the one to tell you this, but Elena and I have been worried about some things we've noticed about Desiree. Can we meet tonight? There are things you need to know." Dr. Richardson watched Alfonso read the message and nodded gravely. "I see your family has concerns as well. Mr. Davies, I cannot tell you what to do, but I can tell you this. Protecting yourself and your assets may be more important than you realize." When Alfonso emerged from the office 20 minutes later, he was no longer the same man who had entered. The poison had taken hold, spreading through his system like acid, burning away 6 years of trust and love with every heartbeat. The drive home was a nightmare of silence and growing suspicion. Desiree chattered excitedly about their son, completely unaware that the man sitting beside her now looked at her like she was a stranger. She talked about nursery preparations, about baby names, about their future as a family, and every word felt like a lie to Alfonso's poisoned mind. "The doctor seemed concerned about something," Desiree said finally, sensing the change in her husband's demeanor. "What did he want to talk to you about?" "Nothing important," Alfonso lied, the first lie he'd ever told his wife. "Just some routine genetic questions." But his mind was racing with dark possibilities. Had there been signs he'd missed? Mysterious phone calls? Unexplained absences? Times when she'd seemed distant or secretive? That evening, while Desiree slept peacefully beside him, Alfonso met with Vincent and Elena in the penthouse lobby and walked deeper into hell. "I didn't want to be the one to tell you this," Vincent said, his voice heavy with false concern as they sat in the shadowy corner of the building's exclusive bar. "But Elena and I have noticed some troubling patterns." Elena leaned forward, her eyes glittering with malice disguised as worry. "The way she's been acting lately, Alfonso. The secretive phone calls, the mysterious errands, and now this genetic situation." "What genetic situation?" Vincent asked, playing his role perfectly. Alfonso found himself explaining Dr. Richardson's findings, watching as his brother's face grew increasingly grave. "Brother," Vincent said finally, "I think you need to consider the possibility that Desiree may not be the woman you thought you married." Elena nodded sadly. "We've done some discreet research into her background. Her relationships before she met you were extensive. Always wealthy men, always targeting those with significant assets. The final blow came in the form of doctored evidence that seemed to confirm their worst accusations." Vincent slid a manila envelope across the table. Inside were expertly forged photographs, fake financial records, and fabricated phone logs, all suggesting that Desiree had been living a double life. "I'm sorry, brother," Vincent whispered, "but you needed to know the truth." Alfonso stared at the manufactured evidence, his world crumbling with each fabricated lie. The woman who had been his everything, his heart, his reason for breathing, was it all an elaborate con? By the time he returned to their penthouse, the poison had completely corrupted his judgment. He stared at Desiree, sleeping peacefully in their bed, her hand resting protectively over their child, and wondered if anything about their life together had been real. The next morning, Alfonso woke up as a different man, one who looked at his wife with suspicion instead of love. Desiree sensed the change immediately. The man who had worshipped her for 6 years now watched her like she was a stranger, studied her every move for signs of deception. "Alfonso, what's wrong?" she asked, her heart beginning to race with unnamed fear. "Nothing," he replied coldly, but his eyes told a different story. The trap had been perfectly executed. The poison had spread through his veins. And the greatest love story of their generation was about to become its greatest tragedy. Dr. Richardson deposited his $1 million payment that afternoon. Marcus and Elena celebrated the success of their plan, and Desiree Davies, innocent of everything except loving her husband with all her heart, had no idea that her perfect world was about to explode into 1,000 pieces. Chapter 5. The Queen's Stand and Racing Against Time. The confrontation that would either destroy or forge a marriage began with 4 words that cut through the morning air like broken glass. "We need to talk." Desiree looked up from where she sat in their nursery, 8 months pregnant and glowing with the radiance of approaching motherhood, arranging tiny clothes in the dresser they'd chosen together. The tone of her husband's voice made her blood freeze, cold, distant, filled with an accusation that hadn't yet been spoken. Alfonso stood in the doorway like an executioner, his eyes holding no warmth, no love, only the terrible weight of suspicion and barely contained rage. "About what?" Desiree asked softly, though something deep in her soul already knew that their perfect world was about to shatter. "About the lies," Alfonso said, stepping into the room that should have been their sanctuary. "About the deception. About whether anything you've ever told me was true." The accusation hung in the air like poison, and Desiree Scott Davies felt something powerful and fierce awaken within her. She rose from the rocking chair with the grace of a queen preparing for battle, her hand instinctively protective over her swollen belly. For a moment, she simply stared at the man she'd loved for 6 years, searching his face for any trace of the husband who had worshipped her, who had bought islands in her name, who had promised her forever. "Careful, Alfonso," she said quietly, her voice carrying a warning that made him pause. "Be very careful about what you're about to accuse me of." But the poison in his system was too strong, the manufactured evidence too convincing. Alfonso pulled out the manila envelope Marcus had given him, throwing its contents across the nursery floor like weapons. "Explain these," he demanded, his voice rising to a shout that shook the hand-painted murals on the walls. "Explain the genetic evidence. Explain why our child carries markers that don't match my family line. Explain why you've been lying to me about everything." What happened next would be talked about in whispered conversations for years to come. Desiree looked down at the forged photographs and fabricated documents scattered across their baby's nursery floor, then raised her eyes to meet her husband's gaze. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of thunder and the finality of judgment. "If your trust can be broken by one doctor's words, then maybe I don't need you. I know the truth, and one day you will too." The words hit Alfonso like physical blows, but instead of backing down, he pressed forward with his attack. "The truth? The truth is that I've been a fool. The truth is that you saw a rich man and decided to play the longest con in history." Desiree's laugh was sharp enough to cut diamond. "A con? A con?" Her voice rose to match his, filled with righteous fury. "You think I spent 6 years playing a con? You think I endured 5 years of fertility treatments, 5 years of heartbreak, 5 years of crying myself to sleep, all for money?" She stepped closer to him, her eyes blazing with a fire he'd never seen before. "You want to know the truth, Alfonso Davies? Here's the truth." Then Desiree delivered the revelation that would change everything. "I've known about Vincent and Elena's plan for months," she said, her voice deadly calm. "I've known they were plotting to destroy our marriage. I've known they wanted to cut me out of your will and claim your fortune for themselves." Alfonso staggered backward as if she'd struck him. "What?" "I could have left when I saw your doubt in me," Desiree continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "But I stayed because love is stronger than whispers. I stayed because I believed our marriage was strong enough to survive their poison." She moved to their bedroom window, staring out at the city that had witnessed their love story. "I've been protecting you, you fool. I've been gathering evidence, documenting their conspiracy, building a case against them. I kept quiet because I didn't want to break your heart, by showing you who your family really is." The truth hit Alfonso like a freight train, but the poison in his system was too strong. "You're lying," he said desperately, though doubt was beginning to creep into his voice. The genetic evidence shows exactly what it should show," Desiree interrupted, turning to face him with tears streaming down her cheeks, not tears of weakness, but tears of rage. "That you carry a rare genetic variant that you've passed on to our son. Your son, Alfonso, the son you're now questioning because a corrupt doctor twisted medical facts into weapons." She walked to their dresser and began pulling out suitcases, her movements sharp and decisive. "But you know what the saddest part is? They knew exactly what kind of man you really are. They knew you'd believe the worst of me without a fight. They knew your love wasn't strong enough to survive the first test." Alfonso watched his wife pack with growing horror as the magnitude of his mistake began to dawn on him. "Desiree, wait. No." The word came out like a slap. "I'm done waiting. I'm done hoping. I'm done believing that our love means anything to you." She turned to face him one final time, her hand resting on her belly where their son grew. "I want you to remember this moment, Alfonso. I want you to remember that when the woman who loved you more than life itself needed you to choose between her and doubt, you chose doubt. When she needed you to fight for your family, you became the weapon used against it. The final blow she delivered was designed to cut his soul in half. "Never doubt me again," she said, with the authority of a queen issuing a royal decree, "or I will walk away with my child and my dignity, and you will never see either of us again." By nightfall, Desiree Scott Davies had vanished from his life, leaving behind only empty closets and the echo of devastating truth. Alfonso stood in their nursery, surrounded by the debris of their shattered dreams, finally beginning to understand that he might have made the most catastrophic mistake of his life. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "If you want to save your family, get a second opinion. Try Dr. Yamamoto in Tokyo. He specializes in the genetic variant you carry. The truth is not what Richardson told you." For the first time since the ultrasound, doubt began to creep in. Not doubt about Desiree, but doubt about everything he'd been told. The next morning, Alfonso Davies boarded his private jet to Tokyo, finally ready to learn the truth that would either damn him or save his soul. Dr. Yamamoto's report was devastating in its clarity. The genetic variant Alfonso carried was completely normal, utterly benign, and had been present in his bloodline for generations. There was nothing suspicious about it, nothing that suggested questionable paternity. Dr. Richardson had simply taken a normal medical finding and twisted it into a weapon of doubt. But by the time Alfonso returned to New York with the proof of his wife's innocence, Desiree was gone. Her lawyers refused to reveal her location. Her phone went straight to voicemail. The woman who had loved him unconditionally, who had protected him from his family's betrayal, who had carried his child while he accused her of infidelity, had vanished like smoke. And somewhere in the city, 8.5 months pregnant and completely alone, Desiree Davies was preparing to teach her husband the greatest lesson of his life. Chapter 6. The ultimate revenge and triumphant return. The birth that would change the course of history happened at 3:33 a.m. on a cold Tuesday morning, while the most powerful man in America paced outside Mount Sinai Hospital like a broken soul begging for redemption. Desiree Scott Davies brought her son into the world with the same fierce strength she'd shown when she'd walked out of her marriage. As little Alexander James Davies, she'd chosen the name meaning defender of men for the warrior he would become. Took his first breath, she whispered a promise that would reshape their entire universe. "Your father is about to learn what happens when you betray a queen," she murmured against his tiny forehead. In the hospital corridor, Alfonso was surrounded by an army of lawyers, FBI agents, and federal prosecutors, all carrying evidence that would destroy his family and vindicate his wife. For 3 weeks, he'd been building the case that would expose the conspiracy, working 18-hour days to uncover every lie, every forged document, every paid bribe that had nearly destroyed his marriage. The trap Desiree had set was a masterpiece of calculated justice. Mrs. Davies anticipated you would eventually discover the truth, her lawyer Janet Morrison said coldly, holding a briefcase that contained 3 weeks of Desiree's own investigation. While you were doubting her, she was documenting every aspect of your family's conspiracy. Phone records, financial transactions, witness testimony. She built an airtight case. FBI agent Sarah Chen stepped forward, her badge gleaming under the hospital lights. Dr. Richardson confessed everything after 6 hours of interrogation. He's provided detailed testimony about the bribery, the deliberate misrepresentation of medical evidence, and the systematic campaign to destroy your marriage. Detective Rodriguez opened his folder with grim satisfaction. Vincent and Elena Davies have been arrested on charges of conspiracy, fraud, and criminal defamation. They're looking at 5 to 10 years in federal prison. Alfonso's knees nearly gave out. She knew. All this time, she knew. Your wife is a social worker trained in criminal psychology, Agent Chen replied with barely concealed admiration. She recognized the manipulation tactics immediately. Every accusation you made, every piece of evidence you showed her, she already knew it was fabricated. At that moment, the delivery room doors opened, and a nurse appeared with news that brought the most powerful man in New York to his knees. Mrs. Davies has delivered a healthy baby boy, the nurse announced, and she's ready to see you now, Mr. Davies. But she has conditions. As they walked toward the delivery room, Janet Morrison outlined those conditions with surgical precision. First, you will hold a press conference admitting your mistakes and clearing your wife's name publicly. Second, you will establish a $4 billion foundation in her honor. Third, you will get on your knees in front of the world's media and apologize for doubting the most honorable woman you've ever known. Alfonso stopped walking. $4 billion? Consider it the price of forgiveness, Janet replied without mercy. When Alfonso finally entered the delivery room, he came face to face with the most beautiful and terrifying sight of his life. Desiree lay against pristine white pillows, holding their son, looking like a goddess painted by angels. But her eyes, those eyes that had once looked at him with infinite love, now held the cold calculation of a queen sitting in judgment over her enemies. "Hello, Alfonso," she said, her voice controlled and steady. "Meet your son." Alfonso approached the bed like a condemned man walking to his execution. When he saw his son's face, unmistakably his own features in miniature, the Davies jawline, his exact eye color, he collapsed to his knees beside her bed. "Desiree," he whispered, his voice breaking with the weight of his shame. "I'm so sorry. God, I'm so sorry." "Sorry isn't enough," she replied, her voice steady as granite. "Sorry doesn't heal the wounds you carved into my heart. Sorry doesn't undo the moment you chose to believe lies over 6 years of devotion." Then Desiree Davies delivered the most devastating and perfect revenge speech in human history. "You want to know what you destroyed, Alfonso? You destroyed a love that was supposed to be unbreakable. You threw away a marriage that was meant to last forever because someone whispered poison in your ear and you were too weak to fight for us." She shifted their son in her arms, and Alfonso saw how perfectly the baby fit against her heart. "This is Alexander James Davies, your son, the child you accused me of conceiving with another man while I was lying in your arms every single night." Her voice grew stronger, more powerful with each word. "Look at him, Alfonso. Really look at him. See your own face looking back at you. See the genetic variant you gave him, the same harmless chromosomal marker that Dr. Richardson twisted into a weapon of doubt. Desiree's eyes flashed with the fire that had made him fall in love with her in the first place. "I could have left you the moment you showed me those fake photographs. I could have walked away when you chose suspicion over trust. But I stayed because I believed our love was stronger than their lies." What happened next would be broadcast live on every major news network in the world. Within an hour, every media outlet in New York had received an anonymous tip about a press conference at Mount Sinai Hospital. By evening, the parking lot was flooded with reporters, cameras, and millions of viewers watching live coverage of what would become the most watched apology in television history. Alphonso Davies stepped up to the podium flanked by FBI agents, holding folders containing evidence of his family's crimes. Behind him, visible through the hospital windows, was the silhouette of his wife holding their newborn son, an image that would become iconic. "3 weeks ago, I made the worst mistake of my life," he began, his voice carrying across the crowd and into living rooms around the world. "I accused the most honorable woman I've ever known of betraying our marriage based on fabricated evidence and deliberate lies." The confession that followed was brutal, honest, and absolutely devastating. Alfonso detailed every lie Vincent and Elena had told, every piece of false evidence they'd manufactured, every moment when he'd chosen doubt over devotion. He exposed Dr. Richardson's corruption, his family's greed, and his own catastrophic failures as a husband. "My wife didn't just give birth to my son today," he said, his voice breaking with emotion. "She gave birth to the man I should have been all along, one who finally understands what it means to be worthy of her love." Then came the moment that would be replayed for generations. Alphonso Davies, billionaire, tech mogul, one of the most powerful men in America, dropped to his knees in front of the world. "Desiree Davies," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the microphones, "you are the strongest, most incredible woman who has ever lived. You protected me from my own family's betrayal. You carried our son while I accused you of infidelity. You loved me when I was too weak to love you back." Tears streamed down his face as he continued, "I don't deserve your forgiveness. I don't deserve to be called your husband. But if you'll let me, I'll spend the rest of my life earning back the right to stand beside you." As Alfonso knelt before the world, Desiree appeared at the hospital entrance, carrying their son. She walked toward the podium with the grace of a queen approaching her coronation, every step watched by millions of people around the globe. When she reached her husband, she stopped and looked down at him for a long moment that seemed to last forever. "You hurt me deeper than I ever thought possible," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the microphones. "You made me question whether our entire marriage was real." The crowd held its breath as America's most wronged wife stood in judgment over the man who had betrayed her. "But I forgive you," she said, and the world erupted in cheers. Because that's what love does. It forgives, it heals, it chooses hope over hurt. She placed their son in Alfonso's arms for the first time, and he looked down at the miracle he'd nearly lost forever. "His name is Alexander," she said softly, "just for him. It means defender of men. Remember that the next time someone tries to convince you that your blessings are curses." The epilogue to their love story was written in justice and triumph. 6 months later, Vincent and Elena Davies were sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for conspiracy, fraud, and extortion. Dr. Richardson lost his medical license and faced his own criminal charges. Their assets were seized and donated to the Desiree Davies Foundation for Children's Healthcare, a $4 billion charity that would heal thousands of children in her name. But the real victory belonged to Desiree Davies, who had faced the ultimate betrayal and emerged not as a victim, but as a queen. She had turned her husband's greatest mistake into his greatest lesson, his deepest shame into his deepest love. In their penthouse nursery, as baby Alexander slept peacefully in his golden crib, Alfonso wrapped his arms around his wife and whispered the words he would say every day for the rest of their lives. I love you, I trust you, and I will never doubt you again. Desiree smiled, secure in the knowledge that she had not only forgiven her husband, she had forged him into the man she'd always deserved. Their love story had survived its ultimate test and emerged stronger than steel, deeper than oceans, and more eternal than the stars themselves. The Queen had won her greatest battle, and her reign would last forever.